there's a terminology that's coined survey slapping. So every time you do something, you get a 5-question thing. Are you happy? Will you buy from us again?
You're listening to CX Passport, the show about creating great customer experiences with a dash of travel talk. Each episode, we'll talk with our guests about great CX, travel, and just like the best journeys, explore new directions we never anticipated. I'm your host, Rick Denton. I believe the best meals are served outside and require a passport. Let's get going. Today, we head into the B2B world. Sure, many of you are thinking, yeah, Rick, you say B2B is different, but is it really? Don't the same customer experience and marketing principles apply? It's all fundamentals, right? Well, let's explore that today. I'm excited to have a chance to talk with Hale, the founder of Consight Marketing Group, who lives and breathes the B2B world. Along with his focus on B2B, what sets Alan apart is his unique approach to customer insights. Instead of relying on traditional methods like web surveys or focus groups, he takes it up a notch. He's a firm believer in the power of meaningful connections, conducting those in-depth phone interviews with key decision makers and influencers of important and major accounts. By doing so, he uncovers those invaluable customer-specific insights that become the foundation for actionable strategies and tactics. Notice something in there? Insights. Actionable. That should be the norm, and yet it's not for so many companies. I want to learn more today from Alan on how the B2B world can move from just collecting data to insights, to action, ultimately to tangible business value. It's going to be a good ride today. Alan, welcome to CX Passport.
Thanks for having me, Rick.
Let's get going after this. Now, you are not one to shy away from difficult conversations or unpopular views.
I get hammered all the time for things I say. So I'm going to break this beginning part into a couple sections, and then you can ask me questions, and we can move on. First of all, I have done over 250 B2B market research projects in my career. I stopped counting. I've gotten so old, I've stopped counting. And I hear now a philosophy that B2B is the same as B2C. It's H to H, human to human, or person to person. And what I say is it's nuts. It's not. And basically, B2B is so different from B2C, so different. And I'll give you some reasons, then we can talk about the insight here. But so first of all, in the consumer world, B2C, if you think like toothpaste or bleach, you've got millions of customers, okay? And what rules the day is statistical significance. In a B2B market, you have something called the 80-20 rule. 20% of your accounts have 80% of your volume. So your job as a marketing research is to identify what drives each of those stakeholders. It could be purchasing, could be marketing, could be packaging engineers, but in those major accounts. Because if you make those major accounts raving fans, one, they're less likely to churn. Two, you can get higher wallet share. But again, they are different than B2C. B2B is usually, and I'm talking more complex products, not copy paper, but B2B is a long sales cycle. We could have 6 months, we could have 2 years, all right?
Right.
Second thing is you've got, as I said, multiple stakeholders, and each of those have a different role in the purchase process. The next thing is, so there's a committee, and they look at all possible solutions. They bring the vendor in. They normally narrow their choice to 3 or 4 vendors by the time they do the research. And then they have everyone prepare an RFP. And what drives this thing is 2 things: risk and credibility. You don't want to look foolish. You don't want to be fired. And having ROI as the dominant factor in the evaluation process. So contrast that with B2C. If you want to go in and get a Apple iPod They're so cheap, you just go in and get one. You can't do that in the B2B world. There's also a budget cycle. If you're pitching a $3 million product and they're not through their fiscal year, you have to kind of align yourself with that. So what I found, Rick, is that the people that are heavily into B2B understand this. The people that dabble in it would like it to be more like B2C because they don't understand B2B. I mean, that's
Well, and I think something that you said in there, like as you were starting to talk about the differences between B2B and B2C, one thing that I heard in there was, if you do well by them, let's just use the word do well, right? Create a great experience, delight, whatever that looks like, but do well by that B2B customer, they will return more often. They will increase what they spend with you. They will tell their friends and family. Well, that's actually very similar to the B2C world. So that fundamental is the same. What's different and where you described that was, but how the purchase is made, how the decisions go about into making the purchase, and then what are the factors. That there's not a lot of us that think, well, maybe, depends on your relationship with your spouse, perhaps, if you feel some sort of fear of risk and what that might be for a purchase that you make. But the idea of having your career at risk because of a purchase that you make, that's totally different to the B2B world.
Exactly. So in the old days, there's a saying, you're not going to get fired for buying IBM. Okay. I don't know if that's true now or not. All right.
But boy, Alan, you and I know that reference. I wonder if that one's fallen out of the common vernacular, but it's still so true.
But what the part of the truism here is that there is a lot of risk, which means if you are trying to displace a current vendor or you're a new vendor coming into the market, you better have some credible ways of saying, hey guys, we're here over the long term. We're here to support you. Other big accounts have used our product. When you show them stuff from your lab on test results, they said, they're not going to buy it. You have to go to an independent lab. So you have to do everything you can to say, okay, we are a legitimate choice. Your first action, in my opinion, is to make sure you're one of the 3 companies contacted for an RFP.
This is your captain speaking. I want to thank you for listening to CX Passport today. We've now reached our cruising altitude, so I'll turn that seatbelt sign off. While you're getting comfortable, hit that follow or subscribe button on your favorite podcast app so you'll never miss an episode. Love it if you'd tell a friend about CX Passport, leave a review so others can discover the show as well. Now, sit back and enjoy the rest of the episode.
Well, you know what I do want to do is, and I chuckle about this, Alan, is you and I are starting to ask you a question, and then it shows me the passion that you have about something that I didn't even get the chance to ask you about, was that difference between B2B and B2C. It's so clear that that's something that's at your top of mind for you. Now, I do want to go back to what I wanted to ask you, and that was, there was something you said, or actually I think it was a white paper that you wrote. And it was customer experience is circling the drain. Now, that's a pretty bold statement. I really want to, what do you mean by that? Why is CX circling the drain?
Okay. So, at first I'm going to preface this. I'm not a customer experience expert.
Right.
There's tons of experts. I consider you in that category.
Well, thank you.
And others. But from a distance and working with clients, the whole thing to me is crazy, and I'll put it under an umbrella of marketing malpractice. All right. So you've got the CX department measuring everything in the world. Every time you get touched, every time you ask for information, there's a terminology that's coined survey slapping. So every time you do something, you get a 5-question thing. Are you happy? Will you buy from us again? And then it keeps getting nuttier. Then they use a metric, some of these people, called NPS, Net Promoter Score, which is now the Net Promoter System. And in reality, that was intended to measure loyalty and risk, not transaction. So to give you an example here, Rick, I probably get a special potbelly sandwich once a week. Every time I get that sandwich, I get asked to do this 5-question thing. And it's like, And as far as I'm concerned, as long as there's no broken glass in it, I don't care, or as long as I'm not poisoned. So let me kind of go back to this malpractice issue. So you've got customer experience people putting in very complicated systems, measuring everything. They don't concentrate on the real things that make a lot of difference. They can't prove an ROI in most cases to the CEO. The CEO wants ROI, or he's cutting marketing, he's cutting CX, and it just seems like this is an industry in danger of exiting. I mean, so there's a lot of people, a lot of expenses, and so they're not changing behavior. They get scores. They get 62% would buy another tuna sandwich at Potbelly's again, but it doesn't help them improve anything. And it goes to what you said earlier, insights. It's scores, it's not insights. And that's why I like B2B is you can drive to insights. The numbers and the scores are fine, but you have to do more than this. And it's almost like I could see it from the CEO's point of view. Okay, you want another $500,000 this year to do what? And where's the ROI? What are we getting from this? And and then I look at the CX people. So I've had some white papers on this. I had one white paper that I specifically posted in a couple CX associations, and man, it just it drove a ton of debate. I told my wife that night, you might have to start my car in the morning like a mafia don, because people are going, how can you say that? But I'm not always right, but I just believe in calling it like it appears. And if you want it to do something, and then add all this on top of, we're measuring our customer satisfaction, customer experience, okay? But they don't do anything about it. They just don't.
That is where you and I are 1,000% aligned. So where you and I probably don't necessarily see eye to eye is that I'm not actually all that worried about the customer experience as an industry overall imploding. What I am seeing is those that are focused on survey and score. Yay, I got my score, and I survey slapped the crap out of my sandwich customers, but that's all I do with it. That part is going to fade away because there's no path to ROI, and there's no path to business improvement. There's no path forward with that. It is all about driving actual insights and driving to actions, and that's the part that's going to keep winning.
My heart agrees with you. My mind does not, because what I'm seeing now is the boards are asking CEOs for these scores, and they're more like vanity metrics than changes in behavior.
Oh. I can get you any score you want. That's easy, right?
Now you're talking about polluting market research.
Exactly. I totally am.
but the other thing you add on to this, and so we agree that customer experience is important, but how many people are using their customer service departments as a cost center? All right. They look at number of calls handled, cost per call, and
you're preaching.
And it's like, so you're in a race to get some person off the phone because it's going to affect your metrics, rather than the metrics should be, how well did we do in solving your problem? Now, some of the companies are getting it, where they change you, and like, okay, how well did they do and all this. But a lot of them, it's kind of back to scores. So I'm depressed and disappointed because I see a lot of activity, but it's not driving any behavior.
Well, yeah, Alan, stay depressed and disappointed because it helps consultants like me go in and actually help turn some of that depressed and disappointed around. You, again, I preach absolutely on the contact center. It's a cliche, or it's a cheesy little phrase I say, but don't have your contact center be a cost center. It is a customer insight center. So yes, are you solving those challenges? Did you learn from what those challenges the customer had, and how are you making sure that you're not doing it again? Now, we're talking a lot about customer experience here, but you said something else that made me chuckle. It still kind of gives me a little chuckle when I think about it. And you had said, you You'd sure think that marketing is so simple based on what we see on LinkedIn posts about it. Yeah, and clearly, there's more complexity in what our feed is telling us. What did you mean by?
Well,
You'd sure think it's
okay,
so simple out there.
So here again, get my wife to start my car, I guess. But so if you looked under LinkedIn posts, and you kind of get several themes going on, but one is it's so easy. All you need to do is have SEO, or it's so easy. Just be a good copywriter, and so you look at this, and it's like they're starting with tactics. They're not starting with the customer. It's not a light switch. You don't, it's not a NASCAR 500. You flip the switch on, the checkered flag comes out. You have to start with your customer segment, insights, your ideal customer profile, and develop a value proposition. And if you're not doing all that, you're actually doing harm for the client. And I preach a concept called house of marketing. And there's a lot of things in that house of marketing, but it all starts with customer segments and understanding them. And I just had this discussion the other day with someone on LinkedIn, will be anonymous, but they said, well, you want to use customer insights, but that's a long-term strategy. And I said, long-term, so you're not going to be around if you don't use this. You're like a blind folded person trying to hit a piñata and hoping that you hit it, and maybe you will, maybe it's lucky, and all the goods come out. And so I don't understand why a lot of people think this is easy. They want to jump to the tactics. They're real good at. If I sell SEO, you need SEO, Rick. You need SEO. Rather than taking a step back and saying, okay, what is the product? How do customers buy the product? How do they evaluate it? The buzzword now, what's your journey going through this? What's the best way to intercept them? How do we define our ideal customer profile? But no one wants to do that. It takes too much time. I had a client who'll be nameless, and they wanted to jump to let's just do the lead generation. Let's do what's there. And it's like, okay, grab the low-hanging fruit, but you're not going to get a big chunk of the market. You need to understand, where the market is, what the segments are.
Oh, Alan, I'm not too worried about your car. It'll be fine. You don't need to have somebody turn on your car. There's a reason and a space for healthy discussion. And I hope that you can take that discussion a little bit different direction with me right here as I ask you to join me here in the First Class Lounge. We're going to move quickly here and have a little bit of fun.
Okay.
What is a dream travel location from your past?
I would say Paris and a Viking cruise we took 4 years ago before COVID, where we covered a bunch of Europe. It was it's just always it's lovely looking at different cultures, different wines, different beers, so
Amen and amen and amen. Absolutely. So you've had that in your past. What is a dream travel location you've not been to yet?
Well, there's some cities on my bucket list, like Prague.
Mm-hmm.
I've been to a lot. I've been in Italy. I would like to go to Israel at some point.
Yeah.
So I guess depending how long I live, the bucket is bigger and bigger. But Israel's probably number one right now. So
Wonderful.
We're doing a cruise this fall in France and in Amsterdam, but we're talking about 2024.
Nice. What is a favorite thing of yours to eat?
I love steak and scotch.
All right, we're done here. Episode end. Hit stop. Let's leave.
I'm trying to be careful of the red meat thing, but once a week I'll have steak, and there's nothing like ending the week or ending a client call with a scotch or just thinking about things, and it's got to be single malt though.
So listeners, Alan and I are recording this at Friday afternoon, 1:47 p.m. Central Time. I am now thinking of steak and scotch and cannot wait to explore those options. Now, Alan, this is the other
Yeah.
direction. What is a thing your parents forced you to eat, but you hated as a kid?
I gave you two answers to that. So one was Brussels sprouts.
Amen. Okay. Yep. All right. With you.
To me, they taste like old shoes. It's just now it's funny because as I've gotten older, one of my daughters had a boyfriend that taught you how to make Brussels sprouts in maple syrup and bacon, and I seem to like that a lot.
Yeah, but if you got to mask it with maple syrup and bacon, maybe just start with a better base. Closing out the lounge with a travel question. What is one travel item, not including your phone, not including your passport, that you will not leave home without?
Does iPad count or no? Is that
You
more
can put your iPad there.
I would say iPad and yeah, I would say my iPad.
Alan, the iPad has shown up in the show several times, so it is an acceptable answer for sure. I can see why folks would want to make sure that that is their one item they will not leave home without. Hey, we've been talking a lot about the challenges of customer experience, marketing, and what that looks like. Well, we know what's going to solve it all, right? Right? It's the topic du jour. It's technology. It's AI. It's digital. That's going to solve everything, right?
Well, chat GPT is the new god, right? I mean, I think they're opening up a church in our neighborhood. Again, all this technology is good, but you have to master the technology. You cannot be a servant to the technology. And some technology is great at getting data. But again, I always start with the customer. Start with the customer relationships. Don't just automatically jump to the technology. And, I don't want to sound like, okay, to a guy with a hammer in his hand, everything is a nail, but it all starts with the customer. And you have to understand how they buy. How do you keep them happy? How do you make them raving fans? I mean, in the end of the day, you have to make a profit, but marketing really has two big objectives. Bring in new accounts and make sure existing accounts don't churn. I mean, that kind of covers all these sins. And what I see is everyone's worrying about new accounts. Everyone's in love with the new technology. And you couple this, Rick, with a statement that Bain Consulting made. In B2B, only 21% of companies identify and act on insights. 1 in 5.
What?
Yeah, 1 in 5. And I believe that that's even higher than what it is because they probably sampled into larger. So basically, you've got people running around. They don't want to talk to the customers. They'd rather play with their technology, their chatbots, their AI. And in B2B, it's just, it's amazing. I mean, it's. And the more technical toys we have, the less we want to talk to customers. And it's just, and I'll just say, marketers, get off your butts. Go have some discussions with these people. Find out what they like about you, where they want you to improve, how you stack up with the competition. And so I get a lot of reasons why they don't want to do it. But we need to change this.
Yeah, and I'm curious though. So all we hear about is data, right? Data this, data analysis this, data science. There's so much focus on data, and we talked about it in the intro. Talked about it as you were talking about B2B and B2C, that companies have a rich trove of data. But you just said there's something that shocked me. Clearly, this idea that only 1 in 5 actually do anything with the insights. Why? I mean, if it's there, why do we see so many companies obsessed with data?
They're not using the appropriate methodology to get the insights. You send a web survey out, you get a lot of numbers, it's cheap, you don't get a lot of insights. And there's a fear of talking to customers. The CEO thinks it's too expensive. It's gonna get the competition to know what you're doing. The reality is it's a paradigm, and what I hear over and over again, which is hilarious, is we know what our customers want. They don't.
Ugh.
They don't. And some research projects, I will have senior management take a modified survey versus their major customers. And the funny part about this, Rick, is if they're aligned very well, they're harder on themselves. If they're not aligned at all, and I had a client, this is a true story. I had a client in the construction equipment industry, and I'll just leave it like that. And we talked about the Net Promoter Score. And we said, if you took your top 20 accounts, what do you think on average your Net Promoter Score would be? And they're going, 30%, 40%. And we went to the market and talked to their top customers. It was minus 46%. Minus 46%.
Oh boy, you are.
I said, you guys you're not aligned. You're not on the same page. You're not in the same library. You're like in different cities. And there are a lot of reasons for that. But it's just, in my mind, that just kind of said, okay, no matter what you do, it's the management team. I mean, It's like they didn't seem to care. Someone made them do this survey, but.
You know what, Alan, we're coming close to the end of time here, and that actually triggered a thought for me, and that is, you've been around a lot of marketing leaders and a lot of leaders, and you've seen them come up in many different paths. What are some of the paths that you've seen that a marketing leader, that they've come up with, that really helps them drive more towards the customer or perhaps drives them away from the customer? What are some of those different paths that you've seen someone come to that point of marketing leadership?
So I'm going to give you kind of two paths I've seen. So one path is if you take a high-level marketer in B2C, they understand the importance of the customer, importance of insight. They do ethnography, they do focus groups, all that stuff. And when you put them in a B2B environment, they still have, we got to talk to the customer point of view. What's really happening in B2B is there's a race towards using technology, like you'd mentioned. Also, what I've seen is that the vice president of marketing, of sales and marketing, has come up through the sales side about 80% of the time.
Okay.
And what that means is that when sales are down, they reach the arrow out of their quiver, pull it, work harder, build the funnel, close. They don't do a lot of marketing. They may work with an ad agency for branding. And the funny part is, I don't blame the individual. I blame the company. The company should be training these people in marketing using like an executive MBA class, get a generalist marketer to mentor this person, and they can figure out what marketing activities they have. It's like if you were handed a map of Cleveland and you're in Chicago and you're not making any progress, you don't just say, well, work harder, read the streets better, So they need some tools, but everyone is in a race to close existing sales, build a funnel, make the quarterly numbers, and it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. I mean, everyone else is doing it, we'll join in. And I guess if I would just say one thing is, don't be a lemming. Look to see how your company can best grow, and it's always on the customers. What do they want? What do they value? And don't push products at the customers. Understand how to sell to the customers.
Let's end right there. Alan, we're going to go no further. That is a wonderful place to end. If listeners cement on those last three sentences. Everything else Alan said was phenomenal too, but capture those last three sentences. That was gold, Alan. Alan, if folks want to gain more gold from you, get to know a little more about your approach to marketing, your approach to B2B, your insights around the customer overall, what's the best way for them to get in touch with you?
They can either send me a message on LinkedIn at Alan Hale, or we have a website, www.consight, CONSIGHT, marketinggroup.com. They see kind of the stuff that we do. Again, we're all business to business, a lot of voice of the customer, loyalty, churn customers, etc.
Some listeners, as always, scroll down. All those links are in the notes. You don't have to leave the episode. Click there and get in touch with Alan to learn a bit more. Alan, again, thank you so much for being on the show. I hope that you do find your way into a scotch and steak somewhere later this afternoon.
It's icing up now.
Oh, yes. Oh, you've inspired me. I still got a few more meetings, but yes, you've inspired me. And the insights around B2B, yes, there's that fundamental piece of the fact that do customer experience right and you'll get that return loyalty and increased value, but so much is different in the B2B world. And I'm glad that you helped amplify that for me and for the listeners. Alan, thank you for being on CX Passport.
And thank you for having me, Rick. This has been a great discussion. I'm very passionate about getting these concepts out.
Thanks for joining us this week on CX Passport. If you like today's episode, I have 3 quick next steps for you. Click subscribe on the CX Passport YouTube channel or your favorite podcast app. Next, leave a comment below the video or a review in your favorite podcast app so others can find and enjoy CX Passport too. Then head over to cxpassport.com for show notes and resources that can help you create tangible business results by delivering great customer experience. Until next time, I'm Rick Denton, and I believe the best meals are served outside and require a passport.